Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of ClueCon Weekly. Joining us this week is Jan-Niklas Wortmann from JetBrains and a JavaScript expert and advocate. Thank you for joining us today, Jan.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. Really appreciate this.
You'd like to give us a quick introduction about yourself to start?
I would love to. So you already hit like all the big ticket items, right? Like JetBrains developer advocate for TypeScript and JavaScript. I am part of the RxJS core team. I'm an Angular GDE, so Google considers me an expert in Angular. And I'm also hosting the Angular Plus show, which is a podcast that releases weekly about Angular and like surrounding technologies.
Well, that's a lot.
It is.
Well, yeah, I think there's an overarching discussion here that I'd like to touch on, and you have a lot of interesting points to talk about, where JavaScript has sort of a bad rap as being the PHP of 2024 in some circles. I've done a lot of PHP back in the day, so I think that only stems from the fact that any very popular language, if you don't know what you're doing, is going to end up looking like PHP from 2004. It's just it's harder to find badly written Rust code or badly written Golang code. That's because you need to know more, not because they're better.
Yeah.
So how do you think we can improve the quality of JavaScript we write? Myself included, I'm a Ruby developer. I dabbled in JavaScript when I have to, and there's a lot of JavaScript I do, but I'm never happy about how it looks. It's really.
I do think TypeScript automatically helps a little bit, particularly if you're coming from a Ruby background, because concepts like duck typing will seem very familiar and allow you to write fairly expressive code. Also, types are, particularly for bigger code bases, just helpful to have. They improve editing experience, but also like the general developer experience. So having TypeScript enabled would be my go-to. And I literally every like small project I do on the side, I will use TypeScript for literally everything. So that would be my first big thing. The other thing is like JavaScript as a language has rapidly evolved over the last couple of years, I would say, allowing for or enabling new language features with the TC39 as a committee, enabling and allowing new features to the language specification, which allows for more expressive code in the end. Yeah, you can still write hacky code that you did in 1996 with JavaScript, but having those new language features enables you to write more declarative code, more expressive code, and those kind of things are valuable from my perspective. The other thing that I personally like about JavaScript is that language is so simple in the end, that it's the entry barrier is very, very low. So there's that aspect of it that's like compared to like Rust, for instance, where you have to like learn a whole lot more and like understand whole lot more concept. Like JavaScript has a very easy and it's very accessible in that sense, which particular for like late joiners and those kind of things that try to get into the industry. I think JavaScript is a great language, and there are also a whole lot of like plenty of job opportunities from that aspect, because in the end, the other nice thing that I like about JavaScript, it runs literally everywhere. Literally everywhere. You can write JavaScript for writing web apps, which is like the most obvious choice, but you can use it for IoT devices. You can use it for phones, like for apps on your phone. You can use it for literally everything. So that's the other thing with JavaScript. You're not saying at the very beginning, oh, I want to be a front-end engineer or I want to be a back-end engineer. Like you can explore those things as you go a little bit. Those are kind of the things that I really like about JavaScript as a language. It enables those things.
Yeah, I think well, you obviously work at JetBrains, so you have a grip with that. Do you feel like there's any tool that people should be using aside from changing to TypeScript? We have a few questions, but we'll come back to it later.
I mean, the obvious one would be like the JetBrains tools, blah blah blah. We don't need to talk about that, but the tools that I like using, I mentioned TypeScript. I wouldn't do a project without TypeScript. Another one is ESLint for ensuring consistency and code quality on like a higher level than TypeScript does it. And we can talk about that a little bit more. I'm not a big fan of like discussing semantics over like how to format your code. So I'm a big fan of prettier, just enable it, agree with your team on certain conventions once, and then everyone just uses prettier and you have all the same formatted code, which is really nice and makes the Git history a lot less noisy. Those are tools that I use very regularly. The other thing which I very recently discovered is Knip, which is a fairly new library. It is kind of like ESLint, but an additional layer on top, finding like unused files, unused libraries that are referenced in the project. So just like general maintenance, it makes it really nice, because JavaScript developers have that tendency to be like, oh, there's a library for something to calculate, like if something is a prime number, let me use that. And out of nowhere, you have like 300 dependencies. So having like a tool that checks if your dependencies are still in use, things like that are really, really helpful just for general maintenance. I slowly also start to get fond of like AI assistant tools. Obviously, I use the JetBrains one, but that's also becoming more and more part of my general development workflow, which I was surprised by because I was very hesitant at first.
I have to say the same thing about AI tools in general. Like whatever, there's a few, whatever you like, it sort of creeps on you. Like, hey, this block of code that's suggesting is sort of like 90% of what I need. So why not?
Yeah, I was extremely hesitant because like, okay, it needs an internet connection for all the things. I kind of get codependent on things. Also like the whole environmental aspect of things, like, okay, there's literally like a huge waste of water and electricity going on to power those AI tools. But yeah, they're kind of growing on me.
Yeah, it is. I think there's a lot there for. I mean, if you know, I still feel like you still need to know what you're doing very
Yes.
well.
Yes.
The pitfall is, hey, now I am now a Golang. I'm using Golang as an example because it's the language I know just enough to not be doing it. You know what I mean,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I know just enough to make it work, but it's going to be completely wrong in conventions and usage and whatnot. And it feels like I shouldn't use AI for writing Golang.
There's often the saying like, oh yeah, AI tools make like the learning experience much better. I don't think that is a use case where I would ever use it, because you need to have the pain points of like things not working yourself so that you have like an actual learning moment. But where I like to use it is like for repetitive work, for like one thing I always need to look up in JavaScript is like if you use a sort algorithm, whether like the negative number, how basically in which direction it sorts. And it's 99% of the cases I just need to look it up, be like, okay, -1 shifts it and +1 keeps the order and those kind of things. So that's something I always need to look up with. And I recently had that experience where our AI tool just wrote the entire sort function with multiple parameters. And I'm like, yeah, this is completely correct. I double checked still if the negative and stuff, if that works, if that's the right way, but it just worked right away. And that, like the time saved in those kind of instances accumulates very, very quickly. And in the end, we as software developers, I hate to say it, but in the end, we're the most productive if we generate code, and if we generate code for a company, not just generate code per se. So having a tool that makes us more efficient in that sense, I think is very helpful and is going to become industry standard in some way.
Yeah, I think repetitive work as it's a very good use case. Makes it that you can actually understand. So you understand what's going on, but at the same time you know what you're doing. For example,
Yes.
recently we've done a lot of work on vectors for our AI product. We're doing some work on getting PDFs parsed and all the other stuff. And there's a lot of repetition in that.
Yep.
You're segmenting the blocks, loading them up, and once it knows what you're doing, it's really really helpful in writing out the code far quicker. Still need to know what you're doing. Just can't say that.
Yeah. This is literally the reason why our AI tool is called AI Assistant, because we want to emphasize it's just helping you. It's not like taking over the steering wheel for you. It's just an assistant for you, helping you with repetitive work, making your life a little bit easier instead of taking over the steering wheel and writing entire code bases for you.
Definitely. Yeah. So let me go back to something.
Sure.
You mentioned TypeScript.
Yes.
As many people who have dabbled in JavaScript, and I mean, I can write an express process with 3 endpoints, or I can make a button that makes a div appear or disappear, and it's pretty much like the extent of my knowledge in JavaScript. What is different, and why is it recommended?
So TypeScript will seem very familiar once you have background in like any other programming language that has like some kind of type system, whether it's Ruby, whether it's Java, all those things. You will be like, oh yeah, this looks familiar. So the nice thing is that TypeScript aims to provide type safety while still being compliant with the entire JavaScript specification.
Oh, okay.
So it is really just like a compilation step in the beginning, assuming, okay, this is the type you're having here, and therefore you have those properties available. That is basically what it boils down to. So instead of saying, hey, I have something here, which might be a string, a number, a Boolean, an object, and all those things, and at runtime you're checking, okay, what am I dealing with, or just assume this is what I'm dealing with, which is kind of the JavaScript approach. In TypeScript, you're saying, hey, this function takes a number object, just a number as an argument, and therefore you can just apply number operators on that. There are still ways, because JavaScript is kind of willy-nilly, it's like, oh yeah, you can have just in that function, you can just put like an object, a string, an array, and all those things. So there are still ways to deal with the flexibility that JavaScript provides on a type safe level. So that's really there are things where, if we're talking about like libraries and those kind of things, where type safety is like really important, like you want to have like from the very starting point to the very end, you want to have type safety. There, TypeScript can become really bananas very, very, very quickly. For applications, from my perspective, writing the types is pretty easy, because I mean, in the end, you're dealing with, I don't know, like basic user objects, right? So you define the shape of the user, and then you're just working with that user, and therefore you always know what the properties are. You get great IntelliSense over that, so you're not having like unnecessary typos in your code. Sorry, my microphone is doing weird things.
Yeah, I think it's a great starting point for a discussion about how typing actually helps you break your code apart more. Like, you can be sure the relationships between the components are defined, so you don't do anything wrong.
And that's
sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's one of the things that I try to ensure with I write TypeScript code is like, and the enum is a great example. Usually, if you add a value to an enum, there are multiple places where you need to make adjustments to your code base to enable that feature properly. With the way that TypeScript is structured, you can ensure that you get compilation errors even in certain places, and therefore you know, okay, I added now a value to my enum, so I now have like an admin role or something. And with the way you write TypeScript, you can make sure like, oh, here I'm checking the role, so I need to ensure that I handle the case now that I have a new admin role. Like having this additional security layer over the way how you write code and how you structure code, I think is very important for like, not for like a project that you do on your own that goes for like 6 months and then you hand it over to like an IT department and they just maintain it. But if you're like really talking about like a long-term project that is like with several developers where you randomly touch parts of the code base and you might not even know all the parts, I think TypeScript is really beneficial to express this level of like complexity and dependencies between each parts of your code base.
And I think TypeScript is really gaining in popularity these days. I feel like anything that look like that's written professionally, so packaged, which are released, libraries, whatever, they're all built in TypeScript. Although that is not faster by itself, is it?
It is not faster. You can definitely write faster JavaScript code, because in the end, the TypeScript code is getting compiled to some kind of JavaScript, so you don't have that level of flexibility that you could have with JavaScript directly. On the other hand, the browser and the engines by now are so fast that level of speed doesn't matter as much. And also like the TypeScript team itself with like having TypeScript run inside Microsoft ensures that like the code compiles to perform in JavaScript. If we're talking about developer experience, that's a whole different thing. Then we're talking for library maintainers, as I mentioned earlier, like TypeScript is pretty painful sometimes because things can get complex really, really quickly. If I look at the types that we have for RxJS, it's bananas sometimes. And that's also the reason why Svelte, as a popular example, decided to ditch TypeScript and use JSDoc, where you can still express some kind of type safety with, and the TypeScript compiler will pick it up and things like that. But it doesn't have like that expressive syntax forcing you to be very explicit with your types and write more complex types than necessary in the end. And another popular example would be React not being written in TypeScript. But that's more historic because at that time, TypeScript, at the time when React was written, TypeScript was not really a thing. And Facebook was working on their competitor Flow, which is still having some nice features over TypeScript. But in the end, the community maintains types for React. So you can still use TypeScript with React. And it's a very popular choice by now as well, as you said.
It is, again, everything I go read the source code for to glean some information, especially at this day when you're working with AI, which is very new. There are a lot of libraries that are only written in one language and only one person tackled this specific problem. So you just go read through the source to figure out how they did it. And there's a lot of TypeScript. When it's well written, you can find a lot of TypeScript. So it is really.
Yeah, I don't have exact numbers, but I know that within WebStorm, it's like 70 or more than 70% of all projects are with TypeScript.
Well, that's something. I mean, it's almost taking over the language at this point.
It is, particular from my perspective, because there are features that you have in TypeScript directly that don't directly translate in JavaScript. So there's some kind of learning process going on. The thing that I liked about it, because I did some Java in a life before, it seemed extremely familiar. So like getting started with TypeScript is very, very easy if you have that background in another programming language. If you just have a JavaScript background, then TypeScript seems like, okay, why do I need those types of things? And it seems a little unfamiliar from time to time. But coming from another programming language, and I've heard that multiple times because I used to do trainings and workshops for people. If they wrote any code other than JavaScript before, they're like, oh yeah, this totally makes sense. Like,
so two questions which are sort of related about the tool set. Getting started with JavaScript and TypeScript is the hardest part.
It is.
It's actually creating the project and figuring out how to start. For example, well, I come from Ruby, so I might be biased, but it's a slightly bit easier because there's only one tool and it's built into the language. So you set up your gem file, which is like your package.json, and you're essentially done. Well, here I need something to compile TypeScript into JavaScript, and it's something to manage not even the packaging, etc. What is the easiest tool chain, in your opinion, to get started? If someone wants to write a new project today,
it depends a little bit on what you're trying to do in the end. I think the very easiest is to just use Vite as a bundler, and Vite comes with I think they call it templates, where you can say, hey, I want to start with Vite and TypeScript, for instance. And then you have like a basic TypeScript project where the TypeScript is getting compiled to JavaScript. And Vite comes originally from the Vue community. So you can also say, hey, I want to create a new project using Vue.
Okay.
And that would be like one starting point. On the other hand, if you use Angular, for instance, the Angular team provides their own CLI where you can say, hey, I want to generate a new Angular project. And that already comes with the entire build chain set up. And Vue does something very similar. So those would probably be my starting points. At least when you're trying to write like a single page application, right? If we're looking at more like something, I think this trend to like taking this build aspect away and like this whole configuration aspect away from developer and rather have like some kind of opinions from like a framework level becomes more and more popular, because I know Angular did it, Ember did it, Vue does it now. And now with the emerge of like meta frameworks like Nux, Next, Astro, they also have some kind of opinions of like, okay, what kind of bundler do you use? How do you configure your project? So I think this definitely used to be very, very painful. And I still hate the days where I had to configure like Webpack configurations to make sure that like everything is bundled correctly and I can just use it. I think that becomes less of an issue because it seems like Vite is establishing as a standard in terms of build tools. And more tools are betting on Vite and providing direct integration for it. So I hope that this becomes less of a problem because I hated it. And I still to this day hate like messing with JavaScript configuration because it's just so unnecessarily complex depending. And like the configuration looks vastly different if you're doing client work versus backend work. There are whole other constraints that you have to deal with. There are people that geek out on it, and I'm very happy to have them on the team to be able to like tweak the tool chain and like get it more performant and enable new features. Love that, but I don't want to be that person.
Another related question about testing. I, as a Ruby developer, I've been doing TDD since day one. We really do that as it's ingrained in the language more than anything else.
Yeah.
How prevalent is testing in the JavaScript or TypeScript community these days? And is testing actually useful in the same way for other languages?
I think it's extremely useful. There are different testing tools that you have in the JavaScript ecosystem. Like my first starting point would be if you're using Vite, you can also use Vite Test, which is a testing tool based on Vite. And that is running very, very performantly, providing very nice features that I enjoy using. So that would be my first starting point if you want to write like a unit integration test kind of thing. It works also very, very well in a TDD way. The other thing that I feel becomes a little bit more popular in the JavaScript community is if you already have an existing test suite as mutation testing. I'm not sure if you've heard of that. Where you
randomly changing code, right?
Correct. It's basically randomly changing code and make sure that your test fails then to ensure that your tests are having a higher quality and not just testing arbitrary things. So for the most obvious one is like, okay, if you say in your test at the end you're expecting something, does it fail if you're expecting the false condition? This is like the most obvious choice, but there are like more examples that tools like that do. And then we also, because with JavaScript we're often involving like client work, then we also have like UI tests where you want to use like Selenium, or you would have used Selenium a couple of years ago. Now there are a couple more modern tools with Cypress and Playwright, but allowing performant, reliable UI testing is a whole separate thing. And there are now even some approaches where you kind of have like a TDD unit testing approach with like UI on like little UI components. At least Cypress allows for that. I think for Playwright it's still in development. So they're definitely interesting testing tools. I'm personally not the biggest fan of TDD because I always feel like it slows me down. I rather like to write the code that the way I envision it and then test it. I'm very aware of my bias, and I used to work heavily with TDD, so I by now have like a feeling of how to write testable code. So that's a little bit of like a learning on my end. If you feel like you don't know how to write testable code, starting with TDD is definitely a good starting point from my perspective.
I think that is totally my experience too. I don't do pure TDD. I generally, so for me, the convenience with TDD comes with not more. I mean, it's important to have a code base that will not break or will try and not break, but I really find it useful in actual testing. As in, when I'm writing a web application, the fact that I don't have to go back to the web page, type into the form,
Yes.
press submit, and see what happens to the database. Is the time I save? So
Yes.
maybe I'm skimping out on actual testing that is, edge cases, whatnot. And
Yes.
I have a lot of tests of that type. Like, okay, so I need to try and click the blue button instead of the red one. I will write a test. So just I don't have to do it myself.
I think that's something that is where testing is actually very underutilized for like things that are hard to reproduce manually. So I'm working on a tool where you can basically do like code transformation automatically. And that is perfect for unit test or like some kind of testing, because you have like an expected input, some kind of file, and you have an expected output. It was way easier to test that manually. Test that with some kind of automatic test instead of just writing. Okay, you would have to set up an entire project where you have like a couple of files where you would want to run the code transformation, a couple not. So this was, and then after each iteration, you would have to reset the project, try it again, and those kind of things. So for things like that, tests were making my life so much easier. But if I'm like in a normal business application, I feel like by now it's really more like, okay, edge cases, as you said, and afterwards making sure that what I wrote works the way I expected, and like long term for refactoring and stuff going on later on.
Yeah, I think it's again. I think testing has its place, but you need to learn a little. So for people who are starting out, do it a little bit more rigidly. Like follow the tutorial or reading.
Yes.
Well, last question, just direct front end framework to learn today.
That is a good question. Okay, here's my take. If you come from like a backend programming background, so if you've done any experience with like Java, Ruby, those kind of things, Angular will seem very familiar for you, and you will find a lot of things that you enjoy very much. If you have a JavaScript background and you just want to get into the language and stuff, I would probably start with Vue.
So not React?
I'm not a big fan of React, to be honest. So, well,
it makes the two of us, but
so React has its place. If you're trying to land your first job, then I would probably learn React, because the job opportunities are still the best in React, in general. On the other hand, if job opportunities is purely your thing, I would probably go for PHP or Java, but different conversation. React is definitely the most popular choice. So if it's about like job security and those kind of things, I would go for React. React is, from my perspective, compared to the other frameworks, a little bit dated. There are also a couple problems that I have with the project itself, the way it's run in terms of transparency and stuff, that Vue and Angular do way better. I'm not a fan of what I see in the React ecosystem right now, with Vercel taking more and more over the steering wheel of how the framework evolves instead of like Facebook. So I do have some concerns. I'm very glad, I think like last week or something, React 19 made it into the beta. So that is a great step towards showing like a certain kind of health of the project. On the other hand, though, I think Vue and Angular have language or like framework features that allow you to write more expressive code, do fast iterations instead of React. And in the end, the code is more performant because they're signal based, so that rendering operations become a lot quicker compared to React. So those would be from like developer experience. I think Angular and Vue have a better developer experience overall than React.
I think I'll have to agree. As someone who's dabbled into a lot, I mean, I've had to build demos and work in libraries from time to time. It feels like React is its own ecosystem at this point. Like you need to know everything about React, and nothing transfers to anything else, which is weird. It's almost not JavaScript, if you get what I mean. It's JavaScript just because that's the language it's written in. But
yep. Yeah, there are definitely some issues with the way it's designed. There are some really, really cool things, and I do think, and I appreciate some of the things that the React team did for the overall JavaScript community. JSX has its place and is used in Vue, is used in Solid. There are great things that JSX provides. On the other hand, the virtual DOM was a great idea in 2015, now seems to kind of slow down compared to signal-based approaches. So it's a matter of trade-offs. Again, if you're looking for job security, like React won't go away within the next plenty of years. And right now,
probably.
Say what?
Angular will not either, probably.
We'll see.
That said, I'm a big fan of approaches like HTMX.
I've just recently started looking into it, and it's definitely interesting. I don't know yet what I particularly think about it, to be quite honest.
It has its own flavor of that approach. So sending HTML snippets from the server side to be placed in the DOM. That's called Turbo.
Yeah.
And frankly, since I've started really learning Turbo and using it for the demo apps I build, some client stuff I build, it's honestly enough for almost everything. Like if you're just trying to paginate the list,
yes,
it's great, and it feels like it's an app.
Yes, for those kind of things and for that scenario, I think it's perfect. I don't have enough experience to gauge like what developer experience look like and overall user experience in the end. But yes, that's mostly the use case that I see where like, you send some HTML, CSS over the wire from the backend, and you want to add some level of flexible or like interactivity. HTMX seems great for that, from what I can tell so far.
Yeah, it's a probably great approach for people who don't need much client side stuff. Right?
Yes.
If you're just trying to make your app a little bit more interesting, even just and interactive, just go with that as well.
Yes, 100%.
Well, Jan-Niklas, thank you for joining us today. I mean, it's always great to have someone who's a JavaScript expert on the program, and there's a lot more we should work through. But well, again, it was great having you. Go check out JetBrains. Go check out ESLint and see what you think. Start looking at TypeScript. I will revisit TypeScript. I need to take a look.
Totally. Awesome. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So Jan-Niklas Wortmann from JetBrains joined us today. And for the rest of the people, I'll see you next week. Goodbye.